This video is covering the battle at Cosseria Castle of April 13, 1796. The army of Italy, under the recent command of General Bonaparte, has swept forward and already won its battle at Montenotte the day before. He is in the process of dividing the Sardinian Piedmontese army from the Austrian allies to the east. As his army has swept forward from the battle at Montenotte, it came up against the small Austrian auxiliary corps under the command of General Povera. General Povera, realizing that the French army vastly outnumbered his forces, retired his forces towards the old medieval ruins on top of Cosseria Hill. Starting with the French on the left side, we have 3 battalions of 8 figures each, representative of the 18th French Demi-Brigade of the line, led by General Brunel. They were the initial assault force of the first French assault attempt on the castle. All told, during the day there were 3 French assaults. For the Allied defenders, we have the 3rd Piedmontese Grenadier Battalion, led by their colonel, Del Caglietto, along with Austrian rallied grenadiers which joined the defenders at the castle. In addition, there's a small Freikorps detachment of Austrian Freikorps. The castle has got 3 zones: the yellow zone, the blue zone, and the red zone. This side of the castle is impossible to assault due to the steepness of the hill. So it basically left the French one side of the hill which they could make actual assaults on the castle defense. A lot of the castle rules of this nature are all covered in my scenario notes as part of my posting on Wargamerabbit. Now I'm actually going to play this entire scenario in front of you and cover some of the sequence of plays, events, and things of that nature. It's not all encompassing of every possibility which we have in our rules, but I'll give a general play-by-play result and so you have some concept of how we play our games. Bear in mind that certain phases of our sequence of play are not going to be utilized today. For instance, there's no cavalry for either side, so the charge declaration phase for each side is not going to be utilized at all. We'll just skip past it. I'll leave it in mentioning. In addition, there's very limited artillery. The French only had some artillery on the 2nd and 3rd assault, so it's not present on the 1st assault. So again, the mutual artillery fire phase as part of our sequence of play is generally going to be skipped through in a lot of circumstances. Let's start the game. The first phase that comes up is known as the MFP phase, or morale fatigue phase. This is basically an accounting phase where we account for the losses of the previous half turn and also make determinations of the cost of the order utilization during the game. It's a very limited effect in this type of game simply because this is going to be a staged 3-segment type scenario. So the MFP is really going to be sort of a moot point. But I'll make mention of it as I'm going along the sequence of play. Right after that will come the Sardinian cavalry charge declaration phase. No cavalry present, we skip past that phase. Next comes the rally phase for the Sardinian side. And since all their forces are in good order, I have no need to do any rallying. In our game there's 3 morale states: good order, morale disordered, or rout. We represent morale disorder by turning one figure around in the opposite direction in the unit. We represent routs by turning them away, marching them away from the enemy, or in this case routing away, and stacking a couple of the figure bases. In this way we don't necessarily have to put markers on our individual units and clutter up the game table. After the Sardinian rally phase comes the French movement phase, and the movement phase is broken into 2 parts. The first part is when you do all facing and formation changes of all your infantry or cavalry or artillery formations before you start moving the units. Basically what that means is if I want to take this unit which happens to be in column, and we define column as being more figures in the rear ranks than the number in the front rank. Very simple rule. For instance, if I want to put this into a line or a single linear rank, I would do so as such. All the facing and formation changes, like going from line to column, column to square, go out into open order, things of that nature, are done at this segment of the movement phase. Once that segment is completed, then you actually move the units. Now in this case, French infantry in column moves 9 inches a turn. And when we set up the game, it's roughly 8 inches apart between the representative forces. So in this case I'm going to march this column right up the hill and we're going to try and assault the walls. I'm going to send this column up. It's going to try and assault the walls alongside. Notice I'm going just for the blue zone here. I'm going to try and put weight of odds, shall we say, against that sector. And this last column I'm going to leave in the background here. Just in case we get some success and get in, I might have a fresh unit to go in there. And we'll truck the general up a little bit closer. After the French movement segment comes the command segment for both sides, not just the French. And this segment is when you move the actual command officers around, like your generals, or make attachments, detachments, and do some other bookkeeping aspects in the game. For instance, burning fields, burning buildings, things of that nature. It's very common, though, for us to move the generals around at the end of the movement phase, since the command phase starts right afterwards. After the command phase comes the shock combat phase, the assault, shall we say. Now, at this point in time, I need to identify how we handle our shock combat actions. The side that just moved forward, in this case the French, do not execute their shock combats at this point in time, because the general rule for the game is the other side has a chance to react to your movements before you get to execute a shock combat. There's some exceptions for charging cavalry, but I won't go into that right now. So in precise language, shall we say, as the French are marching up this hill, the Piedmontese grenadiers would have their opportunity for doing shock combat. But they didn't initiate the shock combat, therefore there is no shock combat in this phase. After the shock phase comes a mutual artillery fire phase. Since neither side has artillery presence at this moment, there is no artillery firing to be done. Right after that comes the mutual small arms or infantry fire phase. And since the infantry are now within 4 inches of each other, which is normal or long-range musketry range, normal range is considered 2 inches, we are now at the small arms or infantry fire phase. Now what I'm going to perform now is the Sardinian Grenadiers firing upon these French columns coming up. Notice the French will not be able to fire because they have declared a shock combat action. Basically means they're charging home and they were not standing around to exchange musketry volleys with the Sardinians. With that being said, we have to calculate the percentage, because we use percent-based firing, and roll the dice. So I would pull out the small arms chart. Small arms. I'm going to fire a 3-rank line of 4 figures of Sardinian Grenadiers. Comes down to, if the target's within an inch, at 48%. And these are the modifiers if we had any, which in this case we have none. So an implicit say basically means I have a 48% chance to inflict a miniature loss on one of those French columns. I'm firing these 4 Sardinian Grenadiers out here. And we call it firing out into the blue. I'm not going to designate a specific target. 89, we always use the color dice as our tens digit. So in this case, we roll a number greater than 48, and consequently the fire effect had no effect in sufficient amount to remove a miniature. We actually remove miniatures in our game to reflect the losses. There's no other firing to be done. So at this point, I've ended the mutual fire phase, which ends the first half of the first game turn.